So good afternoon, you guys. I do want to do a response video to Top 10 Wrestling and what he said about Tony Khan killing AEW. And there's a lot of just things that I do agree with that he said. And also, I've watched his videos. I like how he's talked about, like, what I call the classic TNA. Like, that's usually the era before, that was the era before Hulk Hogan ruined it. Like after 2014, after AJ Styles left and got off television, that's a whole different era of TNA. But before then was like, what I call the classic TNA period. So his videos are always good to watch, really. So I'd say this with nothing but love. But I do agree with a lot of things that he said. Like, I think one thing he did say was that Ring of Honor does feel like when WWE acquired ECW, that they honestly just don't know really what to do with it. And then there was also something that he said about Ring of Honor just being like a small venue show. And, that's the difference. Like Ring of Honor is in a small venue, and it's also something that happens during AEW. Like if you ever go to Collision, Ring of Honor is actually what they filmed beforehand. So you're around an audience that's there to see Collision, but they're gonna cheer for people at Ring of Honor just because some people want to see extra matches, and I agree with that. I also think that the other thing is that I do agree with is that they don't really know what the identity of Ring of Honor is. Like as I said, like it's supposed to be exciting matches. It's supposed to feature developmental wrestlers. Better word is indie wrestlers, like people who are going to be something one day. And I also like what he said too, that when you watch a Ring of Honor show, like usually in most of those shows are 6 or 7 matches, and sometimes it's match after match after match. And that does not make good programming because you're not really getting invested in any of the characters. And then also you're not doing something which is cheap, is that you can actually have the characters and people talk about their victories and people talk about, their next feud or a feud of people that they want to do, like actually just start some beef really. And you're not seeing that in Ring of Honor. It's just match after match really. And then it's also, like I've said, that, that there's really no like storylines unless you kind of watch it for a couple of weeks, and maybe you'll see Athena or somebody else like talk a little bit more and stuff like that. But I do feel that many people just don't have any motivations. There's other things that I don't like, is that sometimes they over rely on 6-man matches or 12-man matches or team versus team versus team versus team type of thing. And I've kind of said before that this does two things. That number one, if you're not invested in the characters, it's like, you can't really follow these matches or feel for anybody in these matches. Like you look at, you look at WWE when they had like the tables, ladders, and chairs match between the Dudleys, Christian and Edge, and also Jeff Hardy and Matt Hardy. 6 people, but you cared about each person. Or when you watch the Royal Rumble, that sometimes, when it used to be good in like the Attitude Era or the mid 2000s, you would care about most of the 30 people in there, and you would have some people that just stand out more than others, But when you watch like these multi-man matches, sometimes you don't know who these people are, and you get a little lost in confusion. And we all know it's a cheap way of featuring everybody. So the people who want to work. Or it's a way of saying, okay, instead of having people at home, they actually come out and they actually have a match and stuff like that. And so it does feel really cheap. I think the other issue with Ring of Honor is that, Tony Khan does not really care about it. I really think that when he talks about being in Garland, Texas last year and saying that he's happy with 3,000 people showing up to Ring of Honor versus 12,000 people, that's very concerning, because 12,000 people is supposed to maximum capacity. If you don't know about the Death Before Dishonor show coming up, the ticket prices are a maximum of $55. So that would be pretty embarrassing that you may sell out the arena, but you're charging $55. And I think the tapings, if you go to the Ring of Honor tapings, it's like $35 maximum. So that's not good either, And then when you have very low ticket prices, it kind of gives you a motivation to not do your best, really. Because technically, with 3,000 seat arena, if you're charging like $55, that's a little more than $18,000. And if you do that, how are you going to pay for all your wrestlers and your production costs and other things like that? You're really not going to do it. And there's 4 matches announced, really. The ROH men's title, women's title, Leela Hirsch and Leo Hirsch versus somebody else, and that's for the ROH. That's a Texas Death Match. And I believe that the TV title is also being defended as well. Really. So you have 4 matches. So what would happen if they said something like $55? We're not. That's all you're gonna get, really. People are gonna feel like a little ripped off. So I do think that another part of this video is to talk about solutions. And I know I've talked about some of these. I think the first thing that I would say is that that it needs an identity. And I think the identity of ROH has to change a little bit. I do think that, just like with AEW, it's a little muddled, but I think the identity of ROH needs to be, it needs to really be a spillover show. And that just means that you feature a lot of wrestlers on ROH that are on the AEW roster that are trying to be bigger and better deals, really. Maybe they need to work on their craft a little bit. Like, I think a great example is like Nyla Rose, really. Like, put Nyla Rose, make Nyla Rose the women's champion in ROH, put her in a couple of feuds, make her kind of do a lot more, because there's a lot of potential in Nyla Rose, really. And then that way that could lead to something. You look at somebody like Kyle O'Reilly. He's somebody that a lot of people believe in, but it's almost like, he lost to Atlantis Jr., who's Atlantis Jr., but maybe you can do more by giving him a chance. You look at somebody like Konosuke Takeshita as well, really. Like, he should be facing Mark Briscoe for the ROH championship. Give him a couple of matches and give him a title run, give him a storyline, give him something, really. So you take the wrestlers from the AEW roster that have a lot of potential that probably need to work on their skills. I also think they need a forbidden door method. Like, yes, I do agree that they should be having like people from Mexico, people from Japan, but they also need just people like, I think before Hammerstone joined TNA Wrestling, what if you had Hammerstone? What if you had Joe Hendry? What if you had, just random wrestlers that are doing a really great job in the independent scene, you sign them on, or you do an open challenge and you give them some exposure and you do all that other stuff. That would be a good thing too, just to say, okay, it's not just giving AEW people who may need more time to develop. You're also giving a chance to people who are independent wrestlers who need more exposure, or maybe you do local people, like if you have a show in Texas or people in Boston, like somebody from the wrestling schools who are doing great jobs, to give them some exposure. I think that would be something to see. I also think with Ring of Honor, I think another part of their identity should be rebuilding the women's division. And I think that, like I've said, you had like a best 2 out of 3 tables match between Nyla Rose and Athena. You're having a Texas death match with Layla Hirsch this week. So what if you kind of said, we want to emulate the TNA Knockouts division, and we want to have really good women's wrestling? What if you had like a steel cage match and other like matches with women, so you can kind of rebuild your women's division, be a little bit more experimental? Those are good things. We actually even mentioned the other thing too, is that what would have happened if you'd said, sorry about my keys. What would have happened if you said something like, okay, if you want in AEW, the rule is that during their big show, like the All In show, like at Wembley Stadium, what if you said something like the ROH champion and the women's ROH champion, they defend their titles at Wembley Stadium? So you can have something like Athena, and what would happen if you said something like, okay, well, let's say Willow Nightingale wants to face Athena just because she deserves to have a match at Wembley Stadium. What would happen if you said something like, well, Queen Aminata versus Athena at Wembley Stadium, and Aminata wins, or actually she loses and she feels hurt and humiliated, and she has like a year of just trying to work hard for that? What would happen if you had Dalton Castle, who gets a lot of attention, really, and then you said, okay, you're going to have a match with Mark Briscoe? What if you had Lance Storm? What if you had like Layla Hirsch? Or what if you did something like, okay, the trios title, now Christian holds it. What if now they made him the six-man tag title, and you said something like, okay, he's going to defend 2 titles at Wembley Stadium. He's going to defend the trios title, and then they're also going to defend the 6-man title as well. So you're going to see maybe the infantry or another like ROH trios team, and people who want to be serious. Like you don't. Like I forgot the name, those nameless guys, the guys who drink like the hot sauce and they act crazy. Like you don't have people like that. You have people who want to be serious, or you have the Dark Order or somebody like that. Like you kind of like even have them on the pre-show, and then on the main roster you have Christian and his team defend the AEW trios title. Or if you did something like you had, if you must do the trios title like a fatal four way. So you have, maybe the you have like Christian and the Patriarch versus Bullet Club Gold, and then you have the Infantry because they do a great job, and then you have Dalton Castle and the Maximum Male Models. If you decide to put them together in something, then you kind of have that Wembley Stadium. Imagine how that would feel for somebody like Dalton Castle, Queen Aminata, Shane Taylor Promotions, who should be a trios team celebrated. What would happen if all those people are like, okay, wow, in my career, I went from Ring of Honor to just being at Wembley Stadium, so you can kind of defend more titles at bigger shows to help them get more of exposure, or you do something like you have the ROH men and women's title defended at those really big shows just to build up those wrestlers. And then that's the next thing, is that you have to make future AEW champions. What would happen if you have Mark Briscoe have a great run, and then within the next 24, within the next 365 days, he's contending for the AEW men's AEW World's Champion. And what would happen if you did something like you had him and John Moxley become Team Ultraviolet, and then they have like and then they go after the tag team titles, and then you said something like, what if you had like Darby Allin? What would happen if you had Swerve Strickland versus Mark Briscoe, and they had Texas Death Match, and then you had something where Mark Briscoe actually wins, and then he's the AEW champion, and then you had a match with Jack Perry and a couple of other people. So you're turning him from an ROH champion to an AEW champion. So that would be, good. What if you did the exact same thing with like Queen Aminata or Nala Rose or a couple of other people? What would happen if you took Matt Taven and Mike Bennett, and then you kind of said something like, okay, they're doing a great job with the ROH tag team titles. Maybe they need to actually make the Undisputed Kingdom go after the AEW tag team titles and other titles, So you need to almost like develop your next stars through this. And I think that's the next thing that I want to say, is that you need to develop other stars. There's the talks about Sting's children becoming wrestlers. What would happen if you had them have matches in ROH to become the ROH tag team titles? What if they did a really great job and you gave them like the TV title and other things like that? What would happen if you had Sting on commentary and other things like that helping his sons? What would happen like the Von Erichs? Like, one thing I don't like about the Von Erichs is that they only do the Texas shows. So what would happen if you had the Von Erichs and they said, okay, they want to be a tag team? So what if you decided to say, okay, well, they're going to be the ROH tag team champions, and then you kind of have good matches, then they go over to the main roster? What would happen if you did what I said and said, okay, these Von Erich kids are really hot, and then you have them have a tag team match with Mike Bennett and Matt Taven, or you do something like have Shane Taylor Promotions within that, and you do something like, okay, well, you have, Dalton Castle and Mark Briscoe, or you have Mark Briscoe and Jay Briscoe, if he was still alive, God rest his soul, and you say something like, okay, you look at all these people, you see the blood in the water, they care about a big spot, you had a couple of pay-per-view matches, so now we're going to have something where they're going to be at Wembley Stadium in front of 50,000 to 70,000 people. Imagine how much that would elevate them, and what would happen if they had such a great match and they were allowed to do whatever they wanted, and you had a match of the night contender, really. But people also be like, wow, look at these ROH people. There's so much that they can really do, really. And I think that the other thing I would say is that one of the biggest issues is that Tony doesn't really care. Like, again, as I said before, if you have a promoter saying, okay, the arena is 25% full, 3,000 people versus 12,000 people, that's not good. That's very concerning, because, that's a failure. And if you have Tony have that mentality, that's not good. When you have people that you're trying to sell out the ES Sports Arena, and you have $55 ticket prices for ringside seats all the way to bad seating, at lowest $35, that's bad. When you have television tapings that people are paying $35 for, that's bad. There's not an emphasis in saying, what, I spent $25 million. In order to make a profit from this, I should be making like at least $51 million. How could I make that $51 million? I need to kind of do some. I need to do a lot more with that. And I also appreciate this philosophy that if you have ROH wrestlers that have been there a long time, like Dalton Castle, I know I'm saying him a lot, but I like Dalton Castle, or Mark Briscoe or a couple other wrestlers, if they say something like, you know what, I don't want an ROH television show, or I don't want to be on television, or I don't desire to be an AEW wrestler, or be a bigger deal wrestler. I like being a small fish. I mean, like being a big fish in a small bowl. You have to fire those people or not renew their contracts. Like, it really should be an environment where people say, you know what, this is really supposed to be about developmental wrestlers getting some exposure. You keep the ones that you want to keep, really. You have wrestlers like the Von Erichs or Sting's children who want to be wrestlers. You use them as a you utilize them and they kind of perform, they develop, and you see them grow. When they're best for the main roster, you do that. You have overages. Like, honestly, as I said, like, you have so many titles in AEW. What would happen if you had the trios title on this show, or another like title, like the television title or TV title, or Intercontinental or the Continental title? You pick a bunch of wrestlers that could be future world champions in AEW, and then you kind of like, give them the ROH title to see what they can do, really, or the women's title, like I said, like Nyla Rose or Takeshita or Mark Briscoe, or Lance Storm or other people that could be AEW champions, or be like at least people that could draw money at a pay-per-view match. I know there's some names that stand out more than others, really. What would happen if you had Jack Perry be the ROH champion? And it's because he and the Young Bucks want to take over all of AEW, including the ROH brand, and then you had an ROH feud. And then I think that's the last thing I would say, is that you need to have compelling storylines. I've suggested some ideas, like what would happen if you had something where the Young Bucks were like, okay, we're going to be like the 5 mafia families. So you're going to get the Patriarch, we're going to get the Undisputed Kingdom, we're going to get the Don Callis family, and we're going to get, maybe Shane Taylor Promotions or another like faction of villains, and we're going to like actually take over both AEW and ROH. So you have like, Jack Perry, Christian, and maybe Takeshita and a few other people actually hold the ROH titles, and it's like you have to beat everybody. You have to kind of beat everybody in that. What would happen if you did something like you have Dustin Rhodes, who may leave AEW, who wants to retire soon? What would happen if you had him go after the ROH title? What would happen if you had the Dark Order saying, you know what, we want to honor Brody Lee and win the tag team titles or the trios or the 6-man titles at Wembley Stadium? So you did a whole year of them honoring Brody Lee and just trying to win those titles and hold for the longest that they can. What would have happened if you had Athena do something like title versus title? You do something where you say, okay, she's going to be the ROH Women's Champion. She's been a champion for over 600 days. She wants to prove herself. She's going to give up her title run just to have a shot at the Women's AEW Championship, and she wins or doesn't win. What would have happened if you have somebody like Billy Starks do the exact same thing? What happened if you made her a big champion for a long time? She said, like, you know what, she wants to face Mercedes Moné and really prove herself. And they have a match at like a Forbidden Door, another show, like they did with Stephanie Vakir. Or what would happen if, like, again, you have FTR become the AEW Tag Team Champions, and you have a match on Collision for, it's not really for the titles, but you have like a grudge match between the ROH champions versus the AEW Tag Team Champions. What would happen if you actually did a Forbidden Door show and it was like AEW versus ROH? That could be really good. And as I said, the point of it is just to see who's such a good star, who gets such a good pop, really, and then really do that. And I think that's also the other thing I would say about ROH. I think it's a great opportunity to have it like be like a Forbidden Door show where you may have random Japanese wrestlers or random luchador wrestlers. And then the next thing is that I think for it to be profitable, you also have to get to a point where you're having great television, compelling television, and compelling tapings that people want to see ROH on television, and then you make your money that way, really. And then also, like I've said about AEW, I think they need more pay-per-views. But I do think it would be a bad idea if they had 24 pay-per-views. Like, you had 12 AEW pay-per-views and 12 AEW pay-per-views, and then you had 12 ROH pay-per-views. So it's like every other week. No, don't do that. I do think that with AEW they should have 8 pay-per-views a year, and then they should have like at least 6 ROH shows. You know, you can have an ROH show in January, February, right before Revolution, and then you have one in April during WrestleMania season. You have maybe 2 or 3 summer shows, and then you have like an end of the year show type of thing, really, you know. So, and then your goal is ultimately to fill out either big arenas or try to get to big arenas, like maybe like 5,000 seat arenas, and you do more with that, and you try to be on television. So I really think that, as I said, you have to care about profits. Like, there's definitely a lot of things to talk about ROH being successful. I think that, as I said, I think the biggest thing is that Tony has to care, and I just think that he's getting to it, but very, very slowly. But for a long time, it was more of a vanity project, and moreover, that's been hurting AEW. That's been hurting ROH really in his bank account.